What's going on, everyone? It's your boy Savvy, and welcome back to the Savvy Show. And in today's episode, it looks like we got another interesting SCP on our hands, guys. This is SCP-1123, Atrocity Skull. So, first impressions, Atrocity Skull, I'm assuming it might have like some curse elements to it, like if someone touches the skull or whatever, something bad might happen to them, or they'll get cursed and suffer, tragic events in their life. I'm just assuming from the name alone. But, like always, going to find out exactly what this SCP is all about today. But before we get started, just gotta let you guys know, if I sound a little raspy, I'm a little under the weather. I don't know what's going on, but bear with me. Hopefully this too shall pass and things will get back on track. But with that being said, that ain't gonna stop the heat. We're still pushing all gas, no brakes. So with that being said, if you guys do enjoy this reaction, please remember to smash that like button. Really helps the channel grow. It'll be much appreciated, and it takes less than a second, and it's free. So might as well, guys, if you do enjoy the content. And also remember, smash that sub button if you're not already part of the family. I make content like this all the time, so you always get your fix of SCP heat. I'm telling you, you won't regret it. And remember to hit that bell too, so you can stay plugged for each and every upload. And now, with that being said, there's nothing left to be said. Let's get this show started. Alrighty, SCP-1123, Atrocity Skull. Let's get it.
Lots of people believe in the possibility of past lives. The notion that the life we are currently living is not our first.
Reincarnation.
Before you were the person you are now, sitting at home and watching this video, maybe you were a medieval king, a Renaissance painter, or an ancient Spartan warrior.
That'd be kinda cool.
Past life regression is a controversial practice that allows people to look back at their supposed past lives, looking through the eyes of someone in another lifetime.
That'd be kinda cool.
It is
Whoa.
a nice idea, and there's something exciting about the possibility of reliving the experiences of a person from the past.
Don't tell me this SCP
and
does
wouldn't
that.
you know it? The SCP Foundation just so happened to discover an artifact that allows a person to experience another person's memories.
What?
It is not past life
Oh,
regression,
okay, never mind.
and you have no control over whose life you're peeking into.
They say I have no control over it? Let's see how this goes.
But it allows you to look at the world through their eyes. However, when you look through someone else's eyes, there's always the possibility that you will see something you didn't want to. Something troubling, frightening,
You don't even know whose
even
eyes you're looking
traumatic,
through, though.
or worse. So you may not want to subject yourself to SCP-1123, or as it has been ominously nicknamed, the Atrocity Skull.
Uh-oh.
SCP-1123 is an old human skull with no teeth or lower jaw. Across the forehead region of the skull, the Khmer word for remember is written in blood. Testing of the skull and blood determined it was from the 1970s, and that both the blood and skull belong to the same person. The Atrocity Skull was discovered by a colonel in the Vietnamese People's Army in the 1980s
Where?
as part of a
Just in the
collection of
battlefield?
human remains displayed in a Cambodian museum.
Oh, okay.
Struck by the bloody writing and the peculiar feeling that the skull gave him, the colonel decided to send it to Hanoi for further investigation.
Smart man.
While in transit, though, the skull was intercepted by the SCP Foundation.
Damn, how do they
Foundation
know?
agents set a trap along the road, blowing out the tires of the colonel's transportation. The skull was taken and sent to a Foundation facility.
How do they know, though?
And the colonel was given an amnestic to remove all memory of the skull's discovery. The staff of the Cambodian Museum received a similar treatment. All written memories of the skull were erased, and now outside of the Foundation's archives, there is no official record of the skull ever having existed.
What?
The bloody writing on the skull has faded over time, and from a distance is barely visible at all. The first SCP Foundation agent to study the skull, an unknown researcher whose name has since been scrubbed from the Foundation archives,
Oh, he's
had
dead.
a series of unusual experiences while observing the skull. He reported that the script was invisible from 5 meters away. As he approached it, he noted that the writing became clearer with each meter he got closer, until at 1 meter away the writing looked fresh. Unable to stop himself, he reached out to touch it, and found that his fingers came away slick and red. Somehow, the bloody writing was still wet, as if it had been drawn only moments before.
What?
As soon as he touched the text, he began to experience anomalous sensory phenomena. The room filled with the smell of smoke. He could hear the sound of heavy breathing and the pounding of a heartbeat. There were thundering footsteps behind him, and he turned to look. but found nothing there.
So I guess right now he's feeling like the vital signs of another person. It doesn't seem like he's looking through their eyes yet, but
He jerked his hand back away from the skull, recoiling at the sensation of ants crawling over the back of his hand. His eyes began to sting as if filled with ash, and he stumbled backward, only to fall to the ground from a sudden stabbing sensation, like a shard of glass piercing his shoe and the sole of his foot. The researcher was removed from the room and examined by a physician, who found that none of these sensations had accompanying physical symptoms. They were purely psychosomatic, so it seemed. There was nothing in his eyes, no wound on his foot. Contact with the skull had caused him to experience these physical stimuli, but it was all in his head.
Because it was another
this
person's
was far
stimuli,
from the full extent of SCP-1123's impact on those who interacted with it. After several weeks untouched, the skull was examined by yet another Foundation researcher. When she touched the surface of the skull to lift it and take a closer look, she fell into a dissociative fugue state, a kind of distressing altered state of consciousness. She became confused, disoriented, and wouldn't respond to her name. The skull was removed from her grasp as soon as she became unresponsive, but this did nothing to return her to normal. The accompanying researchers simply had to observe her and wait for her to wake up.
So she's basically in a
6
coma.
hours later, when she finally did, she recounted what she experienced after touching the skull. She claimed that she had seen the life of another person in the time between touching the skull and returning to consciousness. She could recount details of this other person's life, describing places she had never been, events she had never witnessed, and even speaking a language she had previously demonstrated no command of. The other researchers determined that the person described actually had existed, though they had since passed away, and that all the little details were too specific to be a simple coincidence.
Bro, that is even more interesting. I thought that they will go see someone else's life that is still alive, not the dead. So you can see lives of people that already passed away. So it's more so memories of people compared to like being in their body and seeing what they're seeing. That's what I thought it would be. Like if someone's walking during the day, you just get teleported, you can see what they're looking at. But you can literally look into the lens of other people that died in their past life. Wow, that's a lot deeper than I thought it would be.
After this encounter with SCP-1123, several other researchers experienced similarly traumatic fugue states. The Foundation was able to identify several shared characteristics among those who touched the skull and experienced the life of another person. All of the people whose memories were seen by test subjects died before the subject was born, were a victim of violence or imprisonment, died in a tragic or violent way by murder, starvation, or infection, and died as a result of being targeted by a political movement. These patterns led to the coining of the SCP's nickname, the Atrocity Skull.
Makes sense.
It is a skull that forces those who touch it to relive past atrocities. In order to further understand the nature of the skull's effects on test subjects and the nature of the lives it imprints on them, a series of experiments were performed by the Foundation. Various people of differing cultural backgrounds were exposed to the skull in an attempt to determine what correlation, if any, there is between someone exposed to the skull and the type of person whose memories they experience. In the first experiment, a man of Irish and French ancestry was told to touch the skull. He immediately collapsed and began to scream in Armenian and resist any and all assistance from Foundation officers. When he returned to full consciousness, he explained that he had taken on the memories of an Armenian farmer who was burned alive by the Ottoman army in 1915 during the Armenian genocide.
When they say memories, are they actually experiencing their own actual deaths? Like, I know it's called the Atrocity Skull, but it's so far they're just saying that they got to see the memories of these fallen, humans. However, my assumption is when they actually wake up, they wake up after the fact that they experienced the person's death that they're looking through their eyes. So, for example, that last dude, he woke up probably after he got burned alive, Sheesh.
During a different experiment, a man with Haitian ancestry touched the skull. Just before touching it, he complained of a chemical smell and a powerful itching sensation. After he touched it, he began to violently cough. His fugue state lasted for 60 minutes, and was characterized by confusion and a sudden ability to speak Kurdish.
Wow.
After waking up from the fugue state, the man was able to describe the imprinted personality of an 85-year-old victim of a mustard gas attack in Iraq in 1989.
Dang.
A third experiment involved a woman with Chinese ancestry who became unresponsive for over 2 hours after touching the skull. She was clearly distressed and began to loudly weep as the time progressed. Once the 2 hours were up, she was able to give an interview where she described her experience while in the fugue state. She experienced the life of a young Ukrainian girl who died in 1932 as a result of violence at the hands of a Soviet brigade. Several other experiments were also conducted, producing similar results. Each time, the subject would experience a fugue state lasting from around an hour to upwards of 6 hours.
6 hours?
The experiments allowed the Foundation to determine some statistical patterns in the personalities and memories experienced by test subjects. The more victims that can be attributed to a historical event, the more likely it is that a test subject will experience the memories of someone killed in that event. There is no apparent correlation between the nationality of the test subject and the nationality of the person whose memories they will live through. While there are no negative physical effects on test subjects who have come into contact with the skull, there is a notable psychological impact, which can be attributed to the traumatic nature of the memories that they were exposed to during the course of the experiment.
Okay, that makes
Subjects
sense.
have demonstrated bouts of grief and depression, as well as struggles with survivor's guilt.
I wonder if they could still keep the language that they learned after their experience with the skull. That would be kind of cool. I mean, that could be a positive side to it. I mean, yes, you're traumatized, but you know new language. You're bilingual now.
Though they themselves did not survive the events that they witnessed, they feel as though they did. In an attempt to alleviate these psychological effects, the Foundation administered several types of amnestics to test subjects. However, these were not effective, and in many cases, they were actively harmful. The SCP Foundation uses a variety of amnestic compounds as a part of its work, but none of them were effective in treating test subjects who had been exposed to SCP-1123.
So they're scarred.
Class B amnestics,
For real.
or regressive retrograde, remove the most recently formed memories from a person's mind. When these were administered to SCP-1123 test subjects, their own memories began to fade away, while the memories of their imprinted personality remained intact.
Wow.
If the dosage was increased,
So those are grandfathered
only
in.
the memories of the atrocity would remain. Other amnestics with similar functions yielded similar and equally troubling results. The wrong memories would disappear, and the subject's original personality would begin to give way to that of the person the skull had imprinted on them.
Whoa.
And so another type of amnestic was applied in an attempt to solve this issue. Class E amnestics, or ennui, do not remove memories from the subject's mind, but rather lessen the subject's emotional response to them.
Okay.
They are intended to weaken the neural pathways and remove the emotional component from a given memory.
That could be good and bad too. Because say like you have some fond memories, you can't feel any emotion towards them. Like, you know, meeting your wife for the first time or getting married or having like kids or whatever. Like all of those would be dulled out. But I'm assuming that's the last of their worries if they're test subjects at the SCP Foundation. So we'll just keep it pushing.
Reducing the subject's stress or trauma response to the information of said memory. All of the science behind this class of amnestics suggests that it would be beneficial to the test subjects involved in this research, but for some reason they were still ineffective. The application of Class E amnestics to test subjects following exposure to the Atrocity skull only worsened the subject's trauma response, contributing to panic attacks, flashbacks, and other symptoms of severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Eventually, the use of amnestics to benefit these test subjects was abandoned entirely. Experimentation with the skull was placed on hold until a beneficial treatment program for the test subjects could be established.
Okay.
Currently, to preserve the condition of the skull and the writing on its surface, SCP-1123 is kept contained in a hermetically sealed container in an argon gas atmosphere. When it is removed from containment for experimentation and testing, it is kept in light at no more than 50 lux, with the temperature inside the container kept between 20 and 24 degrees Celsius, and 55% humidity. No one is permitted to handle the skull under any circumstances except for controlled experimentation. There is a saying that says those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it.
Yep, that's a
As
one.
distressing as the experience of touching SCP-1123 may be, perhaps there is a use for it. Confronting historical atrocities directly and looking through the eyes of their victims is a stark reminder of all the evil that humanity is capable of. Certainly the history reflected by the Atrocity Skull, imprinted directly into the minds of all who touch it, will not be soon forgotten. Those who have touched it, those who speak to them, and all who learn about the impact of the Atrocity Skull should take care to remember history.
I mean, yeah, it's smart that they could see that and they could learn from it, but if that memory is stuck in their head, they're pretty much traumatized for life. I mean,
to learn from it, to make sure that these evils are never repeated again. Perhaps we will even reach a point where we do not have to look through the eyes of the victims of institutionalized evil. We will simply have moved beyond it.
Oh, that dude's
then
buff.
and only then will it be time for the skull to be destroyed. Until then, it remains preserved in the halls of the SCP Foundation as a reminder that, amidst all the horrors contained in those walls, sometimes the greatest monster is us. Now go check out SCP-42's.
Well, that was an interesting SCP. I'm just a little confused about the end when they're saying, like, yes, this could be a stark reminder about how evil things could be. But, like I said before, those memories are ingrained in those unfortunate victims that touched the skull. So I feel like the people that actually touch the skull, they're traumatized. They can't get rid of that memory. So how could they learn from something when they're so traumatized by the past to change the future, you know, from what they were trying to say towards the end? That was kind of weird, but the concept for this SCP is really cool. It could have just been a standard, oh, like you can see through the eyes of just anyone in the world, but it's more so fallen victims that die from tragic events. That was pretty dope. I like what they did there. But with that being said, let me know what you guys think about this SCP in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, and also remember, smash that sub button and smash that like button if you enjoyed the video. So with that out the way, unfortunately that concludes today's episode. However, I'll catch you guys on the next one.